Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy.
Ready?
Yep. This is our part 2.
Yep. So today we're going to do our part 2.
A simple yes is all right.
Sure is. But today we'll be in a state known as the Mother of Presidents because it has produced more U.S. presidents than any other state.
Illinois.
The state we'll be in today is sometimes called the Mother State because parts of the original colony are now part of 6 other states.
I thought we were in Illinois. That's where they moved to.
And then my next hint, the state bird is the northern cardinal.
Virginia?
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. Today we're going to be in Virginia. Tricky, tricky. Because if you remember from last week.
Yeah, it was also the cardinal.
Yeah. And then my final clue to give away the whole thing was that the flower is the American dogwood, which we also discussed last week.
All right. So the feller who was in prison for not killing his children.
He's still in Illinois in prison.
But so just Virginia, you're going to sneak in and tell me about what case they told us? Or what they find on that linked with the DNA match in 2010?
Correct. So this is part 2 of last week's case, which I'm sure has done leaked out of your calendar of a brain. So a slight recap other than what you just now said. Last week we were discussing the ex-convict Jerry Hobbs, who moved from Texas to Illinois after being released from prison in April of 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And that he began his criminal record in 1990.
Right. Listen to part 1 if you hadn't heard it. But, right.
Correct. And then his daughter and her friend, they were 8 and 9, was murdered. Jerry had confessed to it, went to prison. And it wasn't until 2007 that it came back that the semen found in and on the little girls was not Jerry's, but the prosecutor was like, I don't care how that got there. He still did it. And then fast forward to 2010, the semen matched
another
victims in Arlington, Virginia. Even with this new information, Jerry Hobbs was not released from prison. The Illinois state attorney, Michael Waller, was convinced that Jerry had in fact murdered the girls. He couldn't come up with a valid reason why the DNA matched someone else's DNA. As far as he was concerned, Jerry was guilty. End of discussion. Now, for today, we're going to hop on over from Illinois to good old state of Virginia. More specifically, we're going to be in Arlington. We're going to be at the Joint Base Myer-Henderson Hall. That's a base that's jointly made up of Fort Myer, which is located in Arlington, Fort McNair, which is in Washington, D.C., and Henderson Hall, also located in Arlington. And they all got grouped together when it was part of the base realignment and closure that started in 2005. And it's under the command of the U.S. Army, and it has residents of the Army, Navy, and Marines on the base. Okay?
Does that mean it's a soldier?
You're going to have to hold your pantyhose.
Well, otherwise that seemed like irrelevant information.
Shh. Amanda Jean Snell enlisted in the Navy, and she did her basic training at Great Lakes, Illinois. Then she attended the Navy and Marine Corps Intelligence Training Center in Virginia Beach before being stationed at the Joint Base Myer-Henderson Hall. So Amanda would describe herself as kind of isolated because the other people that she was in the military with, they wanted to party all the time, and she just really wasn't interested. That wasn't her scene. And when she got out of the military, she was planning to become a special ed teacher, and she specifically wanted to teach children that had autistic disorder. And unfortunately, on July 11th, 2009, 20-year-old Navy Petty Officer 2nd Class Amanda Jean Snell was in the Navy...
Oh. Okay. Unfortunately, Navy Petty Officer Amanda Snell was in the Navy. All right. That wasn't where I thought you were going with this, but
no. Anyway, so 20-year-old Navy Petty Officer 2nd Class Amanda Jean Snell, she was a naval military intelligence she was a naval military intelligence
You know what? I think she wants to teach you.
You're an asshole. Okay. Amanda Jean Snell was a naval military.
Maybe take out all the navals. You're struggling. Did you mean to write up a tongue twister? This here lady. Or just call her Amanda. We got it. She's in the she's in the Navy.
You don't listen so well. I don't read so well. We's a hot mess over here. Okay, so
Amanda.
I feel like her rank is important and what she did. So she was a Navy Petty Officer, 2nd class. She was a Naval Military Intelligence Specialist, and she was asleep in her bed in the barracks at the Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall. And a man entered Amanda's bedroom. Her door was left unlocked. People, lock your doors always. I say as my doors are unlocked. Anyway, when Amanda didn't report for duty at the Pentagon by 11 p.m. on Sunday evening, her Navy supervisor immediately became concerned, and that's when a welfare check was performed to check on her barracks Monday morning, which would have been July 13th, 2009. So when he broke in, it was July 11th, so it's been 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
So they knock on her door, no answer. They try her door, and it's unlocked. So they venture into Amanda's room. Immediately, it was noted that Amanda's ID and purse were still in her room. And then they also noticed that there was an awful odor. And so they were doing the sniff check of like trying to sniff around, and it led them to the closet. And that's when Amanda was found strangled to death in the closet. She was found crumpled up with a pillowcase over her head. Now, there was an investigation into Amanda's death. Soon a call went out to the Naval Crime Investigation Services, also known as NCIS, but there was a problem. When they went into Amanda's room, it was noted that it was very tidy and the bed was made. The NCIS agents reached out to Amanda's family and friends. They told the investigators that Amanda suffered from migraines, and one of the ways that she would ease the pain of the migraines was that she would put a sheet or pillowcase over her head and curl up in a dark, quiet place.
I can understand that because I got eyeball covers.
Right. So they were thinking that it's possible that she put the pillowcase on her head and scrunched herself into her locker or closet.
What? Did she put herself in there when she had headaches? Or I assume she'd lay on the bed like everyone else.
That's what I would think, but they weren't sure. And also, important to note, Amanda also suffered from a slight heart defect, which I'm kind of surprised that she was able to get clearance to join the military. An autopsy had been done and showed that there was no bruising or signs of a struggle, and the test determined that there was no evidence of a sexual assault.
Well, hold up. What was the verbiage?
Undetermined.
Was there ligature?
I would assume that because of when they checked on her. I guess not. I don't know. It sounds like it was a really shoddy autopsy, but there was no sign of a struggle and no sign of sexual assault or rape, or bare minimum, no sign of sexual activity. The medical examiner's report ruled Amanda's cause of death to be undetermined. So, with no witnesses and no evidence of a real crime, and her room appeared to be undisturbed.
Yeah, because she was in the barracks, so somebody should have heard something if she was murdered.
Right. However, something else that raised a red flag was there were a few items missing from Amanda's room. Her laptop, her phone, her iPod, as well as one of her bed sheets.
Oh. Well, there's your evidence.
But the bed was made, so it was like, I wonder what's going on. So there was a debate as to whether or not she was murdered versus...
How shitty would that have been if she wasn't murdered and then somebody just came in and had sticky fingers and stole their laptop, and then it turns out she's murdered, but the person who stole her laptop was not the person who killed her?
Well, they deserve what they get. Don't be sticky fingered with somebody's stuff. Anyway, so the NCIS forensic agents thought that Amanda might have died of natural causes from being scrunched up in the position she was in her closet with the pillowcase on her head, and that might have just caused her to suffocate. And then there's other people, a veteran NCIS agent, Amanda's report came across his desk, and he was like, no, this is definitely some foul play. So he told the investigators, bag up everything in her room. This is not normal.
Yeah.
How does somebody's stuff go missing? That means somebody was in the room. No. So he made them process it as if it were a homicide. The base being so well secured, the investigators believed that the perpetrator, if there was one, most likely worked or lived on the base. They also noted the possible attacker left a shoe print. It was a Nike Air Force One, which wasn't really useful because those were very popular.
Right.
They take note of all of this, and no one's arrested for her death.
But question, hold up. This was in the barracks?
Yep.
Wouldn't they have a log of who went in and who went out?
Shh. Enough. The investigators went ahead and interviewed other military personnel that lived in the barracks just to see, did anybody see anything, hear anything suspicious, Since there was a debate on whether or not Amanda had died of natural causes, the sense of urgency wasn't as great as if it were a clear-cut homicide. So on February 5th, 2010, 6 months after Amanda was found dead, an officer spotted a silver SUV, a Dodge Durango, slowly cruising up and down the road. The vehicle simply caught the officer's eye because he used to own one that looked just like it. The officer had one that also had a black off-the-road grille on the front of the bumper. So the officer watched the SUV park between two trucks near a bike path. The driver turned off the headlights and let the vehicle just idle. The person sat there for about 15 minutes before they just drove off, which I guess doesn't really raise a red flag. They could have been sitting there to eat their lunch. I don't know. The next night around midnight, that same officer spotted the same Durango again.
No.
However,
he did it.
However, since there had been a massive snowstorm and everything was shut down, this time the officer had nothing better to do, so he decided to follow that silver SUV and his unmarked vehicle. He followed him all the way to Arlington Mill in South Arlington. The officer watched the silver SUV park in a poorly lit area, and again, the driver turns off the lights and stays in the vehicle and just let it idle. The officer then observed the driver of the vehicle kind of people watching as the people walked from bars that stayed open through the storm, and eventually the SUV drove off. But as the SUV drove off, the officer actually got a look at the driver and noted that he looked to be a clean-shaven young man with a black wool cap on. The officer ran the tags to the vehicle and made a note of the owner of the SUV as Jorge Torres. Jorge was only 20 years old. He was born August 18th, 1988, and the officer noted that Jorge does not have a criminal record.
So he calls off his stalking?
Yeah, like he's just a kid. He's got no record, whatever. It's just suspicious activity.
I imagine you end up like, are you being paranoid or are you on top of things level of, is this suspicious or am I making it suspicious?
Right. So a few days later, on February 10th, 2010, another snowstorm hit. A 25-year-old nurse named Katie Mills was working the night shift as a nurse in the emergency room in D.C., and when she got off of work early, she decided to take the metro to her boyfriend's place in Arlington. When she walked out of the metro and realized there were absolutely no cabs because of the snow, she decided to walk. She began taking the back streets. She walked past a funeral home and a library, and she came out next to Washington Lee High School. As Katie came within a few blocks of her boyfriend's house, she realized that a man was approaching her on her right, so she began to walk faster. A man said, "Hey, honey, keep on walking."
That's what he said?
Mm-hmm. And then as he followed her, he said, "I have a gun." Katie said, "Here, just take my things. What do you want?" She tried to hand him her purse, and Katie just kept talking and asking the man questions. He was forcing her to walk with him. He was walking kind of behind her, forcing her to keep moving forward. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The man then told Katie to shut the hell up and keep walking. He put his hand on her jacket and guided her towards a darker street. Her boyfriend's house was within view and just a few houses away. She slowed down and asked the man, "Where are we going? What are you doing? What do you want from me?" The stranger said, "We're going to get into the car," as he tried to push her into a Dodge Durango. Katie turned around in front of him, so she got a good look at his face, and then he pulled a knife out.
Thought he had a gun.
He said he had a gun. She never saw it.
Dirty ass liar.
Right? Well, she refused to get into his car, and she begged him not to hurt her. She said she was a nurse and that she'd just gotten off of work. "Please let me go. Don't hurt me. I'm not getting into your car." He kind of seemed confused that she wasn't going to just get in the car. So then she took that opportunity to beg him to just take the contents of her purse, as she started just telling him what's in the purse.
"Look, I got a 20.
And I think she just talked too much because he was like, "Fine, throw it over there." Katie tossed her purse into a pile of snow and then took off screaming at the top of her lungs towards her boyfriend's front door. And as she was getting closer to his door, her boyfriend and his roommates came flying out of the house because they heard her screaming. But at this point, the man and his Durango were gone. Katie then called 911 and made reports to the Arlington police.
Was this the same night?
That she called 911?
No. The officer was stalking him?
No. So the officer was stalking him on February 4th and 5th, and then this was February 10th. But she gets in her boyfriend's house. She calls 911, makes the report to the police, right? She told the officers that she had gotten a really good look at the man who tried to abduct her. She agreed to meet with a detective and help create a sketch of this man. Unfortunately, Katie didn't get a real good look at the vehicle, and she didn't see a license plate at all. So she really didn't even see the color of the car because it was so dark. She knew it was a light color. Maybe it was tan. She wasn't sure. But she did give a great description of her attacker's face. Arlington police were kind of on the lookout for a tan SUV. 2 weeks later, on February 26, 2010, it was a Friday night, and 23-year-old Julie Thomas and her friend, 23-year-old Karen Marlotti, had plans to go see friends in D.C. They took the metro to Woodley Park, and then went to a party, and then they went to Brass Monkey Bar and Adams Morgan. And around 3 a.m., they took a cab to IHOP. Then around 4 a.m., they began walking back to Karen's house. They stopped outside Karen's door while she dug in her purse for her keys. And then they heard a twig snap, and a man appeared from behind Julie's parked car. The man said, "Give me your wallets, I have a gun." Now, of the two girls, Julie was more petite of the two, and Karen was taller, more athletic. The man told them to keep their voices down and open the door. The man followed them into Karen's house. He took their purses and ordered them to sit on the couch. He asked if there was anyone else in the house. They said no, even though Karen had a roommate that was actually asleep upstairs. He told the girls to kneel, and he bound their hands with a cord from the vacuum cleaner, and then he left the room. They managed to get loose from the vacuum cord, but it was right as he returned from the kitchen with a knife.
Uh-oh.
And he made them get back on their knees. He retied Karen with the vacuum cleaner cord, then bound Julie's hands with a cord from an iron. These women weren't sure what this man had in mind. They noted he was kind of small, and he seemed really unprepared and a little on the confused side, because anytime they objected, he was like, "What? Why are they not listening to me?" And he tried to tape Karen's mouth shut with blue painter's tape. Anybody that's ever used...
That's not very good tape. It can barely keep paint out.
Right. And it would just fall right off. Then he asked the girls, "Hey, so you got any duct tape?"
You got any other tape? This stuff that I brought isn't real good.
Exactly. And they're just like, "What? No, I don't have any tape." And then he ordered them into the bedroom. He told them to get on the bed, and Karen was like, "Absolutely not. I'm not doing that." So he shoves the girls into the bedroom. Then he leaves them there to go look for tape. And when he leaves to go look for tape, that's when Karen threw herself against the bedroom door, slamming it shut. Now, even though the man had attempted to pat them down, he didn't find Julie's cell phone in her pocket.
He didn't do a very good job, so we can rule out that he's a police officer.
Right? Julie was able to reach her pocket and dial 911, but then it slipped out of her hands because her hands are tied, and it fell into the laundry basket. And by that time, the man had busted in the door. He lunged forward and grabbed the cell phone, and then he smashed it against the wall. He then grabbed Julie by the arm and led her out of the house into the street with the iron still dangling between her tied hands.
Mm-hmm.
Karen was dragging the vacuum cleaner behind her and hop into the front door, and saw the man open the back door of his SUV as he shoved Julie into the back seat, making her lie down. Karen began screaming and banging the vacuum cleaner around until the roommate that was upstairs, which I don't understand how the roommate didn't wake up to him banging down the bedroom door.
I could see, well, I don't know.
Maybe they have a noise machine. I didn't think about that. But the roommate wakes up, comes downstairs, unties Karen. They call 911. And by the time police arrive, Karen was hyperventilating, but managed to convey the details of her friend's abduction. And at this point, it's now 4:25 a.m. Now, Arlington police were on high alert in this area. And just to give you an idea for those that aren't familiar with this part of Virginia, it's got a historic low crime rate. The Arlington Police Department employs just 359 officers for a population of 215,000. So when the call about Julie's abduction came in...
So I know how you get upset with me asking questions regarding your statistics, but I don't know whether or not to be surprised of like, that's alarmingly low, of like, what's the average then of like, say how many officers on an average crime-ridden city, how many officers to the population are there?
So there's usually, for nationwide, there is a rate of 2.4 officers per 1,000 inhabitants.
So what's the ratio there?
That is your ratio. Do your math then.
And okay, so if that's the average of what percentage are we below the average?
I don't care. I'm just telling you, they
Fine.
only...
Well, I just don't know whether to be devastated if they're dealing with a quarter or less.
If there's not a huge police department. You want me to do the math right now? I can do the math right now.
Can you?
Shut up. I ain't got me a pen. Now I'm going to lose my place.
No, go on. It's not a lot of...
So your math.
Criminals.
If Arlington has 359 officers for 215,000 residents.
Okay, what?
Shh. And the national average is 2.4 officers for every 1,000 residents.
So if that's the average of what percentage are we below the average?
That means there is 1.67 officers for every 1,000 times the 2.4. That means Arlington should have 516 officers.
I could see, well, I don't know. They're dealing with a quarter less than normal because they're not having the criminals.
Yeah.
So they're going to half-ass this one? Or are they going to whole-ass it?
They're going to whole-ass it because they mobilized the entire police department, and the police were especially on high alert because 2 hours before Karen and Julie were attacked, now keep in mind, Julie was abducted between 4 and 4:25, and at 2 a.m. that same night, Hannah Smith was walking up to her house, and a man approached her from behind and said he had a gun. He tried to force her into his car. Again, this woman also refused him. The pair got into a physical altercation and they struggled. He pulled out a stun gun from his pocket and zapped the shit out of the side of her neck. And unfortunately for him, it didn't knock her down. Instead, she managed to get inside her house and dial 911. Hannah described her would-be attacker.
Hey, you know what? I wonder if when he's been telling everybody he's got a gun, is he just leaving off the first part? It's a stun gun?
Maybe. So, unfortunately for him, Hannah described her would-be abductor as short, young, clean-shaven. He could have passed for a high schooler. That's what she described him as. But Hannah did not see his vehicle. She just knew that he was trying to grab her. And that was just 2 hours before the attack on Karen and Julie.
Well, when you first don't succeed, try again.
Pretty much. Meanwhile, this man was now driving with Julie in the back seat of his vehicle, and he drove to a secluded area where he parked behind a minivan and then brutally beat the shit out of her. The man then asked Julie, "Do you know what's going to happen now?" She said, "No, I don't." He said, "I'm going to rape you." He then unwrapped the iron cord and secured her hands with packaging tape. Then he put a condom on and said, "I'm not an idiot."
I think you are.
He then raped her in the back seat of his SUV, and once he was sexually satisfied, this sexual pervert wrapped the packaging tape around Julie's face and head and pushed her down between the front and back seats of his SUV, and he climbed behind the wheel and drove off. After what seemed like a long time, they pulled off the highway and drove aimlessly for a while before they pulled off onto some rough terrain. Eventually, the SUV came to a stop. Julie said she needed some water, and her attacker scooped up some snow, pulled the tape off her mouth, and rubbed the snow on her face. Julie could see that they were in a heavily wooded area, but she could also make out cars on the road behind them. Her hands were still tied together. The man then climbed into the back seat with Julie and forced her to perform oral sex. Her attacker removed the scarf she was wearing and rewrapped it, but this time pulling it tight around her neck. Julie screamed, "What are you doing?" And he replied, "What do you think I'm doing?" as he pulled the scarf tighter and tighter. Julie struggled, and the more she struggled, the harder he pulled. The scarf dug into the flesh on her neck as she felt her eyes beginning to bulge. Eventually, Julie was lifeless. This man then dumped her body in that wooded area on the side of the road. Eventually, Julie regained consciousness. She was face down in the snow, and it took her a few seconds to realize that she had survived because she had no concept of how much time had passed. She lay still and quiet for a few minutes to make sure that this man was not still around. Eventually, Julie rolled over, kind of spotted the road, and realized that somehow she needed to get there. But she was freezing cold, and she was soaking wet, covered in snow and slush. Her legs were weak. She had to use her arms and elbows to kind of drag herself towards the road until she could kind of kneel with the attempt to try to stand. Now, at that same moment, a man named Thomas Love and his wife Lynn were driving along the scenic route of Prince William Forest Park. Thomas was driving extra slow because he had hit a deer right in that same area, so he was being extra careful. And that's when him and his wife Lynn spotted something moving. So Thomas kind of pulled his car over and decided to get out. Thomas then realized that the movement that him and his wife were seeing was a young woman, Julie. Julie at this point had reached the side of the road and tried to scream out, but her voice was gone. Thomas saw that her skin was blue, she was shivering, blood was coming out of the top of her head. Her skin was scraped off from her knees down, so much so that they thought she had been hit by a car.
Oh.
Lynn wrapped her coat around the young woman. Thomas helped her into his truck to try to help keep her warm, and they called 911. Julie whispered, "I've been raped and beaten." And then she asked, "Where's Karen? Is she still alive?" Julie would be rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Around 8 a.m., as police finished their interview with Hannah, the woman that was able to escape even after being zapped with the stun gun, the police are notified that there's another woman that was attacked in Arlington, but she was left for dead in Prince William County. Within 40 minutes, the Arlington detective was standing in Julie's hospital room. Julie's entire face was swollen. She had tiny burst blood vessels all over her face and neck. Her skin was spotted and her eyes were spotted. Her eyes were bloodshot from being strangled. I don't know if you've ever had anything that's cut off circulation and left blood spots under your skin from the broken vessels. She had dry blood around her mouth, ears, and nose. Her hands and legs from her knees down were cut raw. The damage to her throat from being strangled made it impossible for Julie to speak above a hoarse whisper. Julie described the vehicle as a silver Durango. She also described a large boombox in the back of the vehicle. She also mentioned the iron that he had originally tied her up with, and she described her attacker as a very young, almost high school Latino boy. He was short and clean cut. Now all these women are starting to describe someone that sounds
the same
very similar. Yeah. They also put poor Julie through a SANE exam or a sexual assault exam. He managed to splatter some of his baby batter fluids all over her when he took the condom off.
At first it sounded like you said his baby bladder. I was like, ugh.
Nope, baby I did that. Baby batter. So a BOLO, or a be on the lookout, was issued for the Arlington area for a feller who matched the description with a silver SUV. That same officer who spotted the silver Durango
that stalked it.
He heard the BOLO and was like, they're looking for a silver Durango with a young male Latino driver. And he remembered he jotted down the tags to that SUV after the second suspicious sighting. So luckily, he'd ran the man's tags.
He's got that.
And it would still be in the police department's emergency communication center.
Oh, that's so exciting.
So the officer got a good look at the driver. So he knew the driver kind of met that description. Granted, he couldn't gauge the height. The kid was in the car, but he knew that he was a young, clean-cut Latino boy. So wouldn't you know it, the system was having issues that day.
No.
The officers couldn't narrow down the search, so they had to print out every tag that had been run during that 3-day snowstorm.
Ew.
And then they had to shuffle through them to find a Dodge Durango, and boom, it pops up. They sent the tag over to DMV, and within minutes, they had an email with the driver's photo from their DMV license. And the officers confirmed, yeah, that's the feller, Jorge Torres.
That's got to be so exhilarating.
You want to talk about an adrenaline rush. I bet you that is a serious one, because now you know who you're looking for, but they need to go find him.
Yeah.
The police reach out to the nurse, Katie, who had escaped her attacker, and asked her to come and look at some photos. Katie flipped through 5 or 6 mugshots before she flipped over the photo of Jorge, and she froze. That's him. That's the guy. So not only could the officer identify him, but now one of the potential victims could identify him. Officers tracked down Jorge within 12 hours of him raping Julie and leaving her for dead. He was in the Marines, and he was actually stationed at the same Arlington base where Amanda Snell was found dead. In fact, Jorge's room was 8 doors down from where Amanda's room was.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. When investigators searched Jorge's silver SUV, they discovered quite a bit of damning evidence. They found the iron that Julie had described, as well as Julie's blood. They also found her student ID, her Metro card, and one of her earrings. All of those things, by the way, were still in the backseat of Jorge's vehicle.
It's because he didn't have time to clean up.
They also found the stun gun that Katie had described in his console. So now that Jorge's been linked to these 2 assaults, a search warrant, they wanted to issue one for his barracks, but there was a whole jurisdictional thing that they had to go through. So they had to get a special warrant to allow the Arlington police to even go on the base to search his room. But that came through, and then when they search his barracks, they find a handgun. They also seize Jorge's computer.
Are they allowed to have a handgun in the barracks?
I don't know. I wouldn't think so, because I wouldn't think that you want a bunch of people just freely running around with weapons. But I don't know how that works.
I'm gonna look it up. No, you cannot have a handgun in the barracks.
I think that would be more alarming to the people in charge of the barracks versus the Arlington police. They find a handgun and they seize his computer. And on his computer, they found that Jorge had been Googling directions on how to use chloroform.
Oh.
Yeah. And he also had quite the collection of porn.
That doesn't seem surprising in the military.
All right, but not just any porn. Jorge's porn collection was geared more towards abuse towards women, more specifically than being raped and suffocated.
Oh, well, right.
His DNA was then taken and sent to the Virginia Department of Forensic Science Lab in Manassas. It takes generally about 6 months for DNA to be processed.
6 months!
Ow, that was my ear. But yes. By May, it was confirmed that Jorge's DNA was a match to the DNA found on the surviving victim, Julie, and Jorge was officially indicted for rape, abduction with the intent to defile, which I didn't know that was a charge. Makes sense, but didn't know that.
That's because you're not trying to defile at all.
Correct. Robbery, the use of a firearm to commit a felony, and a few other charges. And when I say a few, I mean a total of 17 charges. Around this time, Jorge's DNA was then put into CODIS, and it pinged to the DNA that was collected in the case against Jerry Hobbs back in Illinois. And this is the same attacker who most likely raped and murdered 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and her 9-year-old friend, Krystal Tobias.
He raped children. That's disgusting.
Yeah. But how was Jorge Torres, a Marine who's only 20 years old and stationed in Virginia, linked to Zion, Illinois?
He lived there.
I'm going to tell you. Jorge.
Where's his home of record?
Jorge and his family lived in the same neighborhood as 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and 9-year-old Krystal Tobias. And if that isn't a close enough connection to the girls, at the time, Jorge, he was 16, 17, but he was friends with Krystal's older brother.
Oh, so they wouldn't have been alarmed because the little girl would have known who he was.
Exactly.
That's
disgusting. Yeah.
I'm sitting there thinking of our brother's friend. I would have been the same way I wouldn't have been like, oh, danger, danger.
Right. A little background on Jorge. When Jorge was in high school, he would cut class. And after the police caught him with marijuana.
The devil's lettuce.
At school.
Oh, so he was one of those.
Yeah. It was in 2005. He would be expelled.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was in my day, and you got expelled for that.
Yep. Jorge turned 18 in 2006, and that's when he enlisted in the Marine Corps. So he got kicked out of school and then joined the Marines, which I thought you needed a high school diploma or like a GED to join the military.
Maybe he got one.
But that would explain why he wasn't prepared. He didn't finish his schooling.
Well, I don't know. There are some high school graduates in Alabama that they still don't know how to read.
That's sad. Anyway, Jorge was not willing to admit to any wrongdoing. Instead, this piece of trash began plotting how he could get out of all of this. And having watched a few too many movies, Jorge began plotting with other inmates to prevent the witnesses from being able to testify. Jorge went as far as sketching a map to one of the homes of one of the victims.
Oh.
Unfortunately for Jorge, investigators put his little tushy in a cell with a police informant, 37-year-old Osama El-Attari.
And he squealed like a pig.
Well, Osama El-Attari, who I'm just going to call Osama, was a former restaurant owner who was incarcerated for defrauding several banks out of $53 million.
So he's good at what he does. Over what time period? Because is this over like 4 or 5, or like he's 70 years old and did it over the last 50?
Well, I told you he's 37.
So he's not 70. A simple no is all right.
Simply listening would help too.
Wow, he was doing pretty good at the frauding though by 30.
Yeah, 37, and he's already been convicted.
I feel underaccomplished.
Dude, I thought the same thing. And then I was like, but you know what? He's also in prison.
Yeah. Don't follow that life path.
But in exchange for being a snitch.
But I never even had $1 million pilfering scheme.
Right? But in exchange for a lesser sentence, Osama agreed to wear a wiretap.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
They're always willing to participate.
Well, during one of his conversations with Jorge, he asked him if he felt any remorse for his violent acts that he committed. Jorge responded in the most disgusting way possible. He said not only was he not remorseful, but he then bragged about the total of 4 rapes and 3 murders.
Can you trust that, though? Because I'm thinking of that part in 10th Kingdom when he's just like, when they ask him what's he in for, and he's like, a burglary. A couple of people got hurt. But in reality, nobody got hurt.
Well, they're like 4 rapes, 3 murders. What?
That's not what your charges say, because I got your little booklet right here.
We got 1 attack.
Like
2 attacks. Well, like they got attacks, but not 4 rapes and 3 murders. His DNA has now been connected to the little girls. There's 2 murders. What else? What else is he talking about? But put a pin in that. Now that he's been connected through DNA evidence and he's recorded bragging about being responsible for the girls' murders, Illinois at this point has no choice but to exonerate and release Jerry, who, by the way, still had not gone to trial, and he was released from police custody on August 4th, 2010, after 5 years of sitting there waiting to go to trial.
That seems like a long time. I know they said, what happened to the whole right to a speedy trial?
From what I'm aware of, you can sign those rights away.
Oh.
Because your defense, they're going to need as much time to prepare your defense. And they're like, okay, well, then you sign away your right to do this. And usually they're more than willing to give away that right so that they can have the best defense possible. On October 12th, 2010, Jorge was found guilty of 14 of the 17 charges from the attack on Julie, the woman that survived the assault, and her friend Karen and the nurse Katie. All the families and women all hugged each other, and they hugged the officer who had followed his gut and ran Jorge's tags in the snow after seeing him for that second time. Because without him, it would have taken even longer to link everything to Jorge.
Yeah.
So that officer being like, this guy seems like he's up to no good, and going ahead and running his tags and remembering it. Because you figure that was a couple weeks later. So the fact that it stuck out to him, they really lucked out. And on December 10th, Jorge was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole, plus 168 years in prison by Arlington Judge Benjamin Kendrick for those 14 charges.
Sure hope he takes a lot of dicks to the face.
Jorge was remanded to the Red Onion prison.
What?
I was like, how bad does it smell?
I was going to say, does that mean they've got a BO problem? And they just, you know what? Let's name it the Red Onion.
I read that and I was like, I'm not sure why it's called the Red Onion Prison.
I guess that's what it smells like.
I did do a rough Google to try to see if I could figure it out. I didn't put much effort into it, but I just found out information about the prison.
Is that the name still?
Yeah.
Red Onion Prison?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like somebody needs to volunteer some deodorant.
That sounds like it.
Or extra soap. Do they have a plumbing problem?
I don't know.
Or no, you remember that one case where they would rape everybody, the part of the showers they called the car wash?
What?
Where they would trick new prisoners over there to rape them?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe nobody showers, so everybody smells like onions.
Well, along with that, I have information for you later.
They harvest onions?
No, about the prison, but I don't want to distract from the case. So Jorge is remanded to that Red Onion prison to begin his 5 life sentences, but his charges weren't done yet. Meanwhile, Jerry filed a lawsuit against County of Lake, also against Lake County Sheriff Mark Curran, and the 8 officers from 5 different police departments that were all part of the Lake County Major Crime Task Force.
Does he even have really any ground to stand on since he confessed?
You really want to spoil the surprise, don't ya? So, anyway, the Lake County Major Crimes Task Force, they were the ones that kept Jerry up for over 24 hours, interrogating him, basically coercing him into a confession and forcing him to look at pictures of his murdered daughter. He files a lawsuit for bullying him into confessing, but he filed his lawsuits. And now with Jorge on the NCIS radar, because again, in order for the Arlington police to go into the barracks, with a search warrant, they needed to kind of go hand in hand with everything that's going on the military base, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's got the NCIS kind of paying attention to what the hell's going on with this kid. The investigator that red flagged Amanda's case in the first place was like, yeah, so we're going to go ahead and process the evidence that we saved from Amanda Snell's barracks. Everything the officers had gathered was still sitting in bags on the shelf in their evidence room.
Yeah, because her death was inconclusive.
Inconclusive, yeah.
Whatever.
So while processing the bedding, because they did take the rest of her bed.
Hold up. Didn't we have a discussion plenty of times before? If you knew what I meant, then don't correct me.
I think you're looking for when I told you, did you know what I mean? Then don't be a dick about it.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah.
Follow your own advice, lady.
Well, anyway, they look for any DNA on Amanda's bedding that they did take, and they find semen. So apparently...
They weren't looking hard enough the first go-round?
Apparently, he got a teeny tiny little wiener that it didn't look like he even raped her.
They weren't checking for wieners.
But when they checked for any sign of sexual activity and nothing seemed amiss...
Oh. Ugh.
Yeah. And originally...
He's got one of those micro penises.
Probably. Because also, I didn't point it out in the part 1, but with the little girls, they said it appeared as if there was no rape. But then upon further investigation, Laura Hobbs, the 8-year-old, had in fact been raped. But without doing a cavity check of her, they didn't see that she'd been raped. So again, that's an 8-year-old little girl. How did you not know? And I just chalked it up to he was a child at the time. Like he's a 16-year-old boy. And I don't know anything about the growth of a boy's penis, so...
I'm glad to know. Because, spoiler, this day and age, I guess you need to disclose you don't have one.
Anyway.
She used to be Andrew.
No. Enough. Shh. While processing the bedding that was left behind, the DNA that they found was confirmed to be Jorge's. And then also, they had found... Jorge owned a pair of the Air Force Ones that matched the shoe prints left in Amanda's bedroom. By May 2011, Jorge was indicted for the premeditated murder of Amanda Snell. The audio and testimony of his cellmate Osama was used against Jorge. He was heard confessing that when Amanda woke up, she saw Jorge on top of her and she couldn't believe her eyes. He said that's when he covered her mouth to stop her from screaming. Jorge then explained he couldn't let Amanda go because if she recognized him from, living in the same...
Being a neighbor?
Yeah. And he said that because if she recognized him, he didn't want to get in trouble. So he began choking her with her laptop cord, and that's when he thought she was dead. He said even after he thought he'd killed her, he continued to choke her to be sure that she was really dead. Then this pathetic excuse for a man then bragged now that she couldn't identify him, he had to deal with her body. And luckily for him, she had room at the bottom of her fucking closet. Began bragging to Osama about how he had raped those 2 little girls and that he beat and murdered and that he got away with that because one of the girls' dads had gone to prison for those murders. He's a real piece of garbage. Also interesting to point out that the investigators that talked to the other barracks people...
Neighbors.
Right. They did speak with Jorge. And he was noted as being very cooperative, very helpful, and he even offered to be their eyes and ears left on the barracks.
Of course he did. But isn't it like one of the focuses on police work?
That they return to the scene?
No. Be wary of the extra helpful people. I feel like that's a thing because the ones who are like overly helpful...
I thought it was more like overly curious. Like, what do you guys got? What do you guys have?
Well, there's that too, but the ones who like are like that level of...
So I took it...
like, because they're trying to throw themselves into a sort of process so that they can... It's really just better if you only do exactly what the officers tell you. They ask you a question, answer the question. Don't give forth weirdly too... Well, I'm not giving you suggestions, you fucking weird asses trying to pry.
Okay.
Like in a handbook of how to be a good murderer.
So...
Never mind. Do all the weird things and get caught, you some bitches.
So from what I gather, it was more along the lines of, since the investigators thought there was a chance that Amanda had died of natural causes, that even though they reached out to
That's so stupid,
her neighbors, that they were more along the lines of like, hey, did you hear or see anything suspicious? And I guess Jorge was like, no, I didn't hear or see anything, but I'll let you know if I do.
I'm trying to think of if somebody came to me and you were murdered or dead, and they were like, "Dude,"
If they find me
it's
shoved
like,
in a closet with a pillowcase on my head, I promise you, if I haven't done that yet, it's never going to
hold up,
happen.
you're ruining my own story. I feel like I do a lot of blanking and be like, yeah, so I have never been aware of her putting a pillowcase over her own head, headache or not, and if anything, she died of an excessive consumption of ibuprofen. So is there ibuprofen in her stomach? Because if there's not, she didn't have the headache. And for two, she's got eyeball covers. Why would she put her pillowcase over her head? Just turn the light bulbs out too. And then, no, as far as I know, she's never put herself in the closet. She hides in the bathroom.
I don't even hide in the bathroom because my boy will just stand right at the door. Dude, he was shoving a picture that he drew and he's like, did I spell the words on this right? And he shoved it under the bathroom door. I was like,
you've been in there too long. He needed spell check.
Dude, I literally just went in there and it's bad enough because my dog came in there with me. I guess it's good to be loved.
Yeah, damn you.
But anyway, back to Jorge. On April 14th, 2014, Jorge went to trial for the murder of Amanda Snell. That's when all that went through.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was horrified and disgusted by Jorge's lack of remorse and his callous nature. And he was sentenced to death thanks to that jailhouse confession and Osama's testimony and the DNA evidence. I don't know if you're keeping track, but that's 5 life sentences plus 168 years and now the death sentence.
Well, I was going to say, I think they should round up anyway. Once you've got 2 life sentences, once you get a third, I think it should be like...
death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. After Jorge was convicted, that added fuel to the fire for Jerry's lawsuit. Because keep in mind, he filed in 2010 and it's getting drug out. But now that Jorge has been convicted, there's proof of audio that he did do it. It helped Jerry's lawsuit. And he won all his lawsuits. Insurance companies paid most of the settlements, but when it was all said and done, this hot-headed alcoholic was awarded roughly $7.5 million. Then, on September 18th, 2018, Jorge went to trial for the murders of the little girls, Laura and Krystal. But the problem with the girls' rapes and murders, Jorge's defense attorney was claiming that the DNA evidence was weak.
Mm-hmm.
And the state's only witness, the guy Osama El-Atari, he was found murdered in Maryland in February of 2018. So that was 7 months before the trial for the murders of the little girls. So with him being murdered, his attorneys were saying the DNA evidence was weak and you can't use him because he's not around to testify.
Yeah, but didn't he testify in court? So couldn't they admit previous testimony in court?
And that is exactly what they did. Good job, Claire. It was ruled that Osama's prior testimony in Amanda Snell's murder trial could be utilized in this trial. Jorge decided, with that being said, he's going to go ahead and plead guilty in exchange for another 100 years. Plus, his other stipulation to pleading guilty was he wanted to be transferred out of the Red Onion prison in Virginia. I was like,
I can't say I blame him there, but I say he should have to stay. Smell those onions.
Right? All in all, Jorge Torres not only had 5 life sentences without parole, but now he's got a total of 268 years tacked onto that, and also sentenced to death. That is until December 23rd of 2024, when good old President Biden commuted 37 out of 40 inmates that were on federal death row. So now this piece of trash has more time to take dicks to his face because his death sentence was commuted to life. Also, in regards to the way Jerry Hobbs was treated, none of the counties acknowledged any wrongdoing. The state attorney, Michael Waller, even went as far as stating he would not even offer an apology to Jerry. He said he doesn't believe that there was any wrongdoing in Jerry's case. Jerry was videotaped and had written a confession about his crimes against the girls. During Jorge Torres' trial, it came out that the elementary school principal had witnessed both of the girls alive in Beulah Park and that he told the police that he saw the girls riding doubles on their bike and that they stopped and talked to an older teenage boy that he described to police as being 15, 16 years old, and everyone was too eager to ignore that evidence and just point the finger at Jerry. But if the police had looked into anything...
Well, I don't know. I kind of go back to he was friends with the girls. How did the dad not know who that feller was?
It wasn't the dad that saw him. It was the principal.
Oh.
But it was during Jorge's trial that principal testified that he told police.
How did the principal not know who that kid was?
I don't know, because I would guess that maybe Jorge could have moved to the area after elementary school, or the principal started there after Jorge had already gone through elementary school. Because 15, 16, that's like 10th, 11th grade-ish. I was still curious because while Jerry was wrongfully incarcerated for the rapes and murders of his daughter and her friend, he was still a violent ex-con with a drinking problem and a drug problem.
Yeah.
So I did kind of look into him a little bit.
I don't blame them for thinking he did it anyway, because he wasn't the bestest feller anyway, and it would appear that it's also, I think, a little on the suspicious side. He's the one who found them.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got some bad luck on that side, but there's also, I think, if any parent's child went missing, they would not stop until they found them. Not saying the police weren't looking for them, but he knew his kid enough to know where she would have wandered.
Yeah. I was still curious about like what happened with him. And unfortunately, just as one would expect from a habitual offender, Jerry Hobbs was again arrested in November of 2014, right around the time that he had just been awarded that money and he had moved back to Texas. He was at a traffic stop. Jerry had meth on him. So he was released on bond. Naughty little Jerry, he decided he wasn't going to go to court. So he took off and missed his court date for those meth charges. And he was again picked up by officers, this time in Cushing, Oklahoma, where he was being held in Oklahoma waiting to be brought back to Texas. And Jerry escaped from the jail in Oklahoma.
I am disturbed by how often people escape from jails.
I read that and I was like, good Lord, how often does this happen? But yeah, sure enough, Jerry escaped. And then he was picked up again and he was recaptured by police shortly after, but he was on the run for a little bit. Eventually, he'd be brought back to Texas for court on 8 charges related to his bond forfeiture and drug possession charges and evading arrest and driving with an invalid license. His total bail that he had to pay for dipping out was $133,000.
A drop in the bucket for him now.
Mm-hmm. And then on April 8th, 2016, Jerry, these are the charges he pled guilty to. Possession of a controlled substance. He got 326 days in prison. Mm-hmm. Also tampering and fabricating physical evidence. He got 2 years for that. Evading arrest or detention with a previous arrest. He got 324 days for that. And after reading that Jerry didn't use all his trauma to try to do better, I was curious about his I don't know how to describe that. I was curious about what he did after the fact. You know what I mean? Like, he just got awarded this money. Yeah, he screwed up, but was the second round or however many rounds you want to call him in jail, these charges that he just pled guilty to, was that going to be enough of a wake-up call that this is not the life that he wants and he wants to do better by his 2 children that are still alive? Was what I had my fingers crossed for.
No, but you can't make sense for a meth head.
True. So I found it quite sad and stopped looking into him. And then it sucks, in my opinion, because, yeah, he was strong-armed into a confession, but I hope at this point in his life that he would at least get some therapy and maybe he can afford a really nice rehab.
No, because now he can afford the good shit, not that stuff with the brake fluid.
I don't know how else they make it, but that's because I don't know how to do the drugging.
It's not a recipe I've looked up.
Well, I was curious, though, because it's like his 2 boys are now older. I was like, they're probably married and have kids of their own. And out of sheer curiosity, because this case wasn't sad enough, I decided to look up Jerry Hobbs IV.
Mm-hmm.
My morbid curiosity. And I saw that he followed in the footsteps of his father and accumulated criminal charges of like receiving stolen property, assault, harassment. And then I scrolled down on the Google search and saw Jerry Hobbs IV had died September 6, 2017, at the age of 29 of a heroin overdose in a halfway house in North Carolina. And I was like, fuck, man. You're supposed to want better for your kids.
Yeah, but that's why they say it's a hard cycle to break.
Yeah.
I'm not really surprised.
And then I clicked on this obituary and I was reading Jerry IV's obituary and saw that his little brother, Jeremy, it said that he had preceded his brother in death. I was like, what the fuck? The little brother's dead too? So I went and found his obituary and saw that he died of a drug overdose at 21 on August 27th, 2011. I was like, oh my God.
That family tree is dropping twigs like a pine.
It was so sad. I also hope that the women who were attacked and the family of Amanda Snell, I hope they sue the state's attorney, Michael Waller, because when they got the DNA evidence that it wasn't Jerry in 2007, and they chose to keep going after him instead of put forth any actual effort, you know?
Well,
because if they had, those
So
attacks wouldn't have happened.
I don't know if it's a case of, it's not like that's the only case they're working on, and that's not the only thing. And since that trial date hadn't been set or wasn't moving forward, I kind of blame his own attorney for, not moving things along.
His attorney had to keep pushing to get the DNA tested because the state wasn't interested. They had their confession. They didn't care to test it.
Right.
It was because of his attorney that they even forced the issue. So his attorney was doing what he needed to do. It was just so much resistance on the state. And then when it came back that it didn't match Jerry, they didn't look any further into it. They said they don't know why, but they did not care, which is probably why he won his case to begin with.
Yeah. Well, but I think of it as like a case of a whole lot of cases, and and I wouldn't even be surprised if they didn't even look into it at all, like much into it, because once they hear they've got a confession, why would you?
And then Andy's fun facts time. After Jerry Hobbs's case was done, like once that was done and over, his lawsuit, all the things, 4 other cases were discovered where that state attorney, Michael Waller, was proven to be a crooked sumbitch. And just like with Jerry Hobbs' case, Michael ignored DNA evidence that contradicted the outcome of 4 other cases. And I think he should be tossed in I think that piece of trash needs to be tossed in prison for being a manipulated piece of shit. Like, you should be able to trust the system. But instead, this feller is manipulating the evidence and ignoring it so that he can make it fit and throw people in jail.
Yeah, he needs to go, for sure.
But that's why, because he had a history of doing that, that's why I think he needs to be sued or whatever. I did see that he's no longer working as the state attorney. Again, I didn't give a shit enough. I think he's a piece of shit. I thought this case was depressing as hell. More fun facts to end it on a higher note. You know how there's different prisons have different security levels ranging from minimum security to maximum security prison? Red Onion Prison was open.
You found the romaine lettuce to the red onion?
Open in 1998 on 375 acres. And it cost $70 million to build that Red Onion State Prison. And it's considered a supermax security prison. It houses 848 of the absolute worst of the worst.
Well, shoot, that's why he wanted to transfer. He couldn't escape.
Right? And it employs roughly 800 people. And more than 2/3 of the inmates are held in solitary confinement. So that means they spend 23 hours a day in their 8x10 cells with their food and medications delivered to them through a slot in the door. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I saw that there's all kinds of human rights activists that are like, that's not right. That's not how you need to treat people. I say throw those people in there with the prison, but that's just me. But that's Jerry Hobbs, and I thought it was extremely sad. His entire family line was wiped out.
Yeah, well, sad, but then also
they weren't productive members.
Well, you don't even have to be productive in order to need to be erased off the earth. But if you're gonna live a life of drugs and alcohol and all the things, and don't be surprised, and even like the whole crime thing, that don't be surprised if you have a short life.
Yeah. I really hope that the names of his children are just super common, because there's more Jerry Hobbs IV.
Yeah.
And that coincidentally, they have a brother named Jeremy Hobbs. But I was really hopeful that maybe that's just a completely different family and his kids are alive and well and have families and they're productive members of society and doing great. But I couldn't imagine seeing your whole family, like all your kids. With that being said, I don't foresee him becoming sober. When his kids were alive, he was having enough trouble finding it sobriety. So with nothing left to live for mentality, that's a waste of $7.5 million.
For sure. He's going to smoke it.
But I'm glad that Jorge was finally caught. I thought it was crazy that he's just walking around sticking his dick places.
Yeah. Well, and to think if he wasn't caught, he was only going to keep it up.
I'd be curious to see if there's more assaults that he's connected to. Because to go from 2005 to 2009, that's a, I guess boot camp
Yeah,
kept
I
him
was going to
busy.
say, no, he didn't have the opportunity because he was being run ragged, and the first opportunity he did have was 4 years into his little, like, because you figure he had to get comfortable enough in his relocating and kind of size up his area, do his stalking, find his victim, do his little planning.
Yeah, and he did do that. He wasn't even like a crime of opportunity kind of feller. He literally would stalk his victims and then attack. And it was just, he's disgusting.
Well, it makes sense to me from 2005 to 2009
Yeah,
because there's a lot of shuffling.
it's true. I didn't think of it like that.
Well, and also he had to work around a roommate.
I'm glad he got caught. Do they keep a roommate?
If they're lower ranking.
Because they're not in training anymore.
Yeah, but what rank was he?
So he was a corporal.
So I would say his first opportunity was in 2009. Well, regardless, let's pretend neither one of them had a roommate at that particular time.
I don't think she did.
But when he went into the military and when he was first put in the barracks, he had a roommate. Or like all the things for basic AIT, he was with other people.
Yeah, because it says he was a corporal in the U.S. Marine Corps, and he lived in a room that was on the same deck as Amanda Snell's, and he was 8 doors away. So,
well, that was a fucked up case. I hope people have learned to stay off the drugs and don't confess to shit. Unless you did it.
and lock your doors.
Even though Andrea doesn't.
My dog will jump on them. I need a better dog. I have a husky.
I don't know. He does bite if he needs to.
If you had to.
Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the channel.